Okay, here we are. We are talking through chapter number 7, the electoral process. And as we get into this electoral system, I introduced this chapter going through a crash course video on political campaigns so that we can understand a little bit better on why this system can be so complicated, so expensive, and so public. And so I have included that in the recordings or in the videos on Canvas. I'd encourage you to watch through that, both at the beginning of this unit and at the end, so you can get an idea of all the things we're talking about summarized and maybe in a little better visual detail. So here's that video. I'm going to skip ahead on that to the nomination process. And so this process of nominating a candidate is a critical part of our democracy. It's really the first step in selecting a candidate who is going to run for office. This is considered to be one of those very important functions of a political party, and it's a big difference here between what we would call interest groups and a political party. An interest group does not belong to the party, but yet they often funnel a lot of money toward a candidate and many times into the party as well. And so these nominations can be very critical to the election process. Some might even argue that nominations are more important than the election themselves, because of the fact that the right to vote for the candidate here is part of this process. And when we are selecting people to get on the ballot, not everybody's involved in that selection process. Even though the choice is theoretically unlimited in who you could vote for president or vice president or senator, the reality is the two major political party nominees are the only two choices that most people have. And so because the power to nominate limits the voters' choices, it also leads itself toward other influences getting involved in the process here. And so we could also bring up the fact that there are some areas in our country in which there's one political party that dominates that area. If we use the state of California as an example, since 1988, there has been no Republican to win in the state of California in a presidential race. And so they have not been able to win that state due to the fact that the entire state tends to vote Democratic. And the only reason in 1980 and 1984 that Republicans were able to win is because the candidate there was the former governor of that state, Ronald Reagan. And so in those particular states where it is very heavily Democrat focused, often the primary race becomes more significant than the general election. The Republicans in the state of California know that they have very little chance of winning an election there because it's so dominated by one political party. And that's why we would say that this nomination process is so very important and can't even be more important than the election themselves. Now, I've got up here all 5 processes by which you can be nominated and put on the ballot. And I'm going to talk through each one, and you should have information that you write in between each one. There's not going to be new information that shows up on the screen. This is it right here, so add whatever you need to in order to be able to remember what each of these is all about. The first nomination method is self-announcement. This is for anyone that wants to hold public office and announces their desire that they want to run and they want to be a candidate. Now, this is something that goes way back. It's probably the oldest form of nomination that we have. And when we go back to our original founding fathers, they would have used this as one of the more common methods due to the fact that our nation was smaller and news would travel mouth to mouth and people would talk about it, and you were able to connect with people on a little more personal basis this way. So now we primarily see self-announcement only as a formality where candidates will get in front of a TV camera and they will announce to the world, I am running for President of the United States. But that's not the way that they actually get on the ballot. In the United States, they have to go through a more difficult process, either caucus, convention, direct primary. Those are the 3 major ones, but they do self-announce as a formality. In the local levels, you might see this as a more realistic option where they could announce and that would be enough to get them on the ballot. A caucus is our second form of nomination. A caucus is a group of like-minded people, and they meet together to select a candidate. You need to make sure that you get that term solidified, because you're going to hear the term caucus quite often, and I'm not going to go back and define that for you. You need to know what that is. So it's a group of like-minded people who meet to select a candidate. And this began early in American history, probably even before the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was put together, as members would meet in local schoolhouses, or they would meet in restaurants and places around the colonies where they would sit down and talk about their political viewpoints and political ideas. And so in a caucus, you're going to have this group of people that are going to meet together and decide who they think would be the best representative of their ideas. And they're going to present that person as the nominee for their group of people. Today, you're going to see several states that still have a caucus to determine who their nominee will be for their party on the ballot. Iowa is one of those states that you will hear about early on in the campaign season. Iowa and New Hampshire are two of the first states to hold their caucus, and they will meet together and decide they want to put candidate A on the ballot for the Democratic Party. They will have candidate 2 or candidate XY on the Republican ballot. And each party has their own caucus that they will decide, yes, this is our guy or this is our girl that's going to represent us, to then go on the ballot in November for the election. Now, a convention is a little bigger meeting. A convention is where you're going to have local party members elect delegates. There's another term that you need to make sure that you know. The term was delegate. A delegate is somebody that represents those local members. And the delegate goes to the convention. And it's their job then to represent the people back home and tell the convention who the people back home want to have on the ballot. And so let's just use a nice round number of 100 as an example here. Let's say that we have 100 delegates, and each of them represent 1,000 people back home. Well, those 100 delegates will each have a vote as far as who they want to have on their party's ballot. And each party will have their own convention. We see this on the national level with the Democrat and Republican conventions, and this is how they officially nominate a candidate on the national level. But in each state that chooses to do a convention this way, they will send those delegates to their capital city or whatever major city they've decided to do that, cast their ballots, and they will represent the people back home in the way that they choose to vote. Our fourth way of nomination is direct primaries. As I mentioned before, the three most common forms of nomination are caucus, convention, and direct primary. Of all of those, direct primary seems to be the most popular among the states, but every state has the freedom to choose however they want to organize their nomination. So in a direct primary, the people, the voters, are going to have the opportunity to participate in selecting the candidate for their ballot. And so they will choose a particular date before the election happens. Generally, these primaries are happening sometime between January and May before a presidential election. This primary will determine who gets put on the ballot in November during the general election. There are two types of primaries that you need to know. The first one is a closed primary. This only allows the qualified voters who are registered in their party to participate in the primary. So a closed primary is not going to allow somebody who is registered as a Republican to vote in the Democratic primary. Some states do allow you to change your party registration on the election day, so that way, if you traditionally vote Republican, but there's no Republican primary, you want to jump in and vote in the Democratic, you could potentially do that, but that's up to the states to decide. There are currently 24 states that use a closed primary and would not allow you to switch parties unless you formally declare that. Now, an open primary is different. It allows a qualified voter to participate in any party's primary election. Now, in a primary, you're not allowed to vote in both. You have to pick one of them, but you don't have to be consistent. So you could potentially vote in the Republican primary this spring, and then a year from now or 2 years from now, you could vote in the Democratic primary. You don't have to declare a party for which you're going to remain loyal. And so those that would argue for the open primary system would say that voters have a lot more freedom, a lot more choice in being able to participate in an open primary. There are currently 26 states that are having open primaries currently. Now, the last one here is the petition. In a petition, candidates must go around and get a number of signatures in order to get their name on a ballot. Typically, this is going to be from a third party or a minor party that is trying to get their name out there and get some recognition. Typically, you are not going to have a lot of candidates who qualify on the petition, especially trying to get on a presidential ballot, but it is possible. Now, you do also have to have qualified voters who sign this petition. They have to be eligible voters and usually registered voters for that. There are a couple other things that I want you to throw in here. In the primary section, I skipped over this and didn't mean to. Most states, the candidate requires only a plurality of votes. We talked about this earlier in the year, the difference between plurality and majority. Plurality means you simply have to have the highest percentage, even if that percentage does not reach 50%. A majority means that you have to have 50% plus one vote. There are a few states that require majority, and if that's the case, then there would be a runoff election after that. There are also nonpartisan primaries, and so put this under your direct primary section in the notes. Nonpartisan primaries means that there is no party affiliation listed on the ballot. Typically, this is for judges or school board members or local officials, where they will not declare a party, nor will they align themselves with a party. And so that is possible when you go to vote in local elections where you may not have a party in there. Now, in class, I also take the time here to go through and show the different ways that candidates can announce their presidency. And I've included those videos in Canvas for you as well to be able to watch through. And as you watch through those videos, I want you to take notice of a couple of things. First of all, the different ways in which the candidates choose to present themselves and announce their candidacy to the world. There are two very opposite methods by which this happens. I also want you to notice as you watch the campaign videos or watch the announcement videos, what are the main messages that are being talked about? What are they trying to communicate to their audience as they announce they are the best person for the presidency? With the Donald Trump announcement, I actually included two clips, one from two different news sources. And I want you to notice there some of the differences in the way in which he is presented based off of the source. And so it's extremely important for you as you are gauging the news sources that you are looking into, that you compare multiple sources, that the candidate is not being presented in a positive or negative way based off of the source. And I think you'll see that as you watch through each of these campaign clips.